my dears, and welcome back to my channel, and thank you so much for coming back for part 2 of my how to draw backgrounds video. In part 1, I gave you guys lots of tips and tricks and hacks on how to come up with background ideas, and if you missed part 1, please go ahead and watch it. I think you get a little something from it. And in today's video, which is part 2, I'll be showing you a step-by-step tutorial on how to draw a background from scratch in perspective. So remember, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. It lets me know that you want to see more videos like this, and be sure to subscribe for more videos from me. Without further ado, let's get started. Being able to draw a background in perspective is a crucial skill for artists to have, but in order to get better at drawing backgrounds in perspective, you have to actually draw backgrounds in perspective. Amazing! I know! There are 2 ways to properly practice perspective: the academic way and the natural way. And like I mentioned before, the natural way is always my favorite because it's far more fun, but in order to actually understand the natural way, you have to understand the academic way. So please be patient with me while I explain a few academic rules of perspective that we all need to know. First, practice by drawing simple backgrounds like the hallway in your house or your apartment building. Really focus on the lines of the walls, the doors, and the tiles. You'll notice that they're all leading in the same direction and seem to meet at one point. You'll also notice that everything seems to get smaller and smaller the farther away it is from you. The furthest things from you always look smaller, and whatever's closest to you looks bigger. That's a little bit of perspective. You'll notice that all the lines of the walls, of the doors, of the tiles seem to meet at one point. The area where all the lines lead to is called the vanishing point. And now that I've explained all of those little rules to you, there's still some more to learn. So we're going to go right into a step-by-step tutorial on how to draw a background in perspective using the academic method. And after this, I'll show you the more natural way to do it. But you need to learn this academic method before you can do anything else, because literally, if you don't know how to do this, you're going to have a very hard time drawing any backgrounds in perspective. So be patient, don't give up, and try your best to learn this method, okay? So let's get started. We're going to create what they call a horizon line. So you know, like that little basic look of a sunset and the sun is kind of like setting behind the ocean? The line that forms the ocean is sort of like the horizon line. Or if you look at this photo of the hill, you see that line that kind of represents the hill and the end of the road? That is what they call a horizon line, because it's basically the horizon, okay? So I hope that made some kind of sense, because I am trying, okay? So I'm going to be using a T-square to create my horizon line, because you line this side of the T-square with this side of your table, and it allows you to create a perfectly straight line. So I'm just going to create a horizon line right here. But if you do not have a T-square, feel free to use a ruler. The way you would do this with a ruler is you would measure how many inches you want on this side, make a little mark, and go over to the next side and line it up. Make sure that both ends are even, and then go ahead and make your line as such. Once you have your horizon line, you now have to figure out where you want your vanishing point to be. You've already seen one with the vanishing point right in the center, so let's do one where the vanishing point is a little to the side right here. I'll make it nice and big so you can see it throughout the tutorial, but in reality, when you do it, you don't have to draw it this big. This is way too big and way too dark. When you do this at home, it can be really, really small and easy to erase when you're done. Let's just pretend we want to do a city scene, okay? So the city, we want to do some buildings, and we want to do a road, and we want to do a sidewalk, okay? So I'm just going to figure that I want the street to be about this wide and kind of land on this part of the drawing, right? And maybe have the building, the first building, the building closest to us, maybe be around here, let's just say, right? Just to give me a rough idea of where I want everything to be. So now I will line up the little edges of the road that I mentioned before. Just line it up with the vanishing point. Okay. And there we go. So that's the road. This will be the actual like street. So now I want to do the sidewalk. Make it raise up a little bit to make the edge of the sidewalk, and then draw this side of the sidewalk just so that you can get a little idea of what I'm doing, you know? I want the sidewalk to end maybe around there, right? Line it up with the vanishing point. Hold the ruler really still and line it up. You could already see it happen, right? You could already see the sidewalk and the road kind of come together, right? We also want a sidewalk on this side, so let's measure this really quickly. Okay. Make sure both sides are the same. And now line it up with your vanishing point. There we go. Looking good so far. So now let's focus on the buildings. So we want this building to be around that tall, right? Line that up with your vanishing point. And kind of make a light line because you may want to use that line for other buildings. Let's make the top of the building, bottom of the building. So this will be like where the little crosswalk is, you know what I mean? So like the pedestrians could come and like cross here. Just gonna line up that corner of the sidewalk and line that up with the roof of the building. So you see what I did there? And I'll find the corner of the building and line it up with the vanishing point. Ta-da! I fixed it. It's completely okay to change your mind. You just erase the lines, make sure everything makes sense, make sure everything lines up, and you're good to go. Just as long as you remember where the vanishing point is and keep in mind what it is that you actually want to draw, you'll be good. So I want this building to kind of end around here. Maybe a smaller building here. A building maybe that goes around this height. Let's just zigzag a couple different heights so you can play around with them, okay? Make sure everything lines up. I highly recommend that you take a ruler and measure out the width on the top and the bottom to make sure that they line up and that it's the same thickness all throughout. Do that for each building before you make this line. So again, take your ruler, measure the width on the top and the bottom, line it up, and then do your lines. But I'm doing it this way for the sake of time and so that you won't get bored watching me make a bunch of measurements, you know what I mean? Just for the sake of the tutorial, but do it the correct way and make sure to do the proper measurements. So now that I have a few different size buildings to play with, I'll take my ruler, find the top of the next building, line it up with the vanishing point, hold the ruler nice and still. Okay, next building, find the top corner of it, line it up like that. The next building, find the corner, line it up. And here we got a little tall one, find the top, line it up with the vanishing point. You see how dramatic it's becoming? Now you take your ruler, and now I'm going to do the side of this building. So I line it up. And just so that you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to add a little bit of rough shading to it. I'll do the side of the tall building as well. Once again, I'll give it some rough shading. And there you go, some basic perspective for buildings and such. But now the slightly more difficult part is windows. So I'm going to do a couple of windows on this building and then a door. Take your ruler, line it up with the top corner of that window, line it up with the vanishing point, make a line. Find the bottom corner of that window, line it up with the vanishing point, make a line. And do the same thing for the bottom row of windows. And now once you have that, now you can just go in and girl, you got yourself some windows. Look at that. And they're in perspective too. And you'll learn a lot from referencing actual buildings and then trying to recreate the photos by, drawing them in perspective. Now let's do that door on the bottom. Find the upper corner, line it up with the vanishing point, make a line, and there you go. Your door is in perspective. You see that? Not that scary, right? And if you're wondering about all the windows on this side of the building that are facing you and stuff, literally super easy. Just take your ruler and line those little suckers up. And then take your ruler and just make some windows, I'm just freehanding it right now just to let you guys kind of get a quick idea of what it is I'm talking about. And now when it comes to the actual road, now if any of you are wondering why is this called the vanishing point, imagine if you were to just continue to draw buildings and draw buildings and draw buildings. They'll get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to the point that they're so small they seem to vanish at this point. Ta-da! Hence the name Vanishing Point. Now onto the natural method. Now the academic method, there were no characters already on the paper. You do the background first and then you draw your characters afterwards. However, the natural method, which is my favorite method, you draw the characters first and then you put everything in perspective. The reason why I like this method the most is it's just a lot more fun. You have your characters already there on your paper, and being able to draw a background around them just makes practicing perspective so much more enjoyable because you're creating a world for your characters versus just creating some rigid little city with no people in it. So once you become more familiar with perspective, you can pretty much draw your characters in perspective naturally and then begin to figure out what angle everything is around them. So for me, I want to draw them sitting on a tile floor. And as you can see, I was able to just go in and kind of figure out where exactly the vanishing point is, which is somewhere around yonder, a bookshelf as well. So I think be something like this maybe. When you're dealing with things like tile floors, wooden floors, furniture with straight edges, furniture in general really, you need to really keep in mind the perspective. So after you're done sketching them all out, find that vanishing point and get cracking, girl. And if you're dealing with something like tiles like I am, you're going to need to measure out the tiles before you go a little too crazy, okay? So it's 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. If you're doing this at home, these measurements should be at the very bottom of your paper. So I'm just going to make a line here so you can pretend this is the bottom of my paper. The reason being, if you make a marking here, and then a marking here, and then a marking here, and then a marking here, they're not going to be lined up perfectly. Your measurements will be off. They have to be on the same line, on the same level for the measurements to be consistent so that you can get a true perspective and each tile can be the same size. I know it's a lot of work, but that's what perspective is, okay? It's rulers, it's measurements. Please stay with me. So let's do the shelf next. I want the bottom of the shelf to be around here. Now take your ruler, line it up. Now I'm going to create the very side of the shelf, and I'll move on and create the side of the second shelf as well. Again, if you're doing this at home, please be sure to take some good measurements. I'm just freehanding the shells right now. I'm not taking any specific measurements for the sake of the tutorial and to save time. But in actuality, if you're doing this at home, please be sure to take some good measurements. You want to make sure that the width of this gap is the same as the width on the bottom of this gap between the shelves and stuff. There is a space between these two shelves, so find the corner of this shelf and make a line, and this will represent the very side of the shelf. You see what I mean? And we want to make some bookshelves. So I want a bookshelf here. Just kind of gonna eyeball it for the sake of the tutorial. But if you're doing this at home, you better be taking your ruler and making sure that each of these sections that you want for the shelf are the same. There you go. Also, if you've already drawn the second shelf like I have, what you could have done is just continue the line over to the next shelf. And now you could actually begin to see the shelf coming to life, as well as the tile floor. When you realize you have bits of your background that are coming off of your paper, there's one of two things you can do. One, you can take another piece of paper, put it behind your drawing, and simply continue the line off your drawing and take your measurements here so that you can make sure that everything is lining up properly. Or you can take measurements up here where it's a little bit more narrow. And make sure that everything lines up that way. It's a little hard to explain how I know where to place the lines, but if you draw from life enough, you will begin to memorize this pattern and know exactly where to put the horizontal lines. Also, if you didn't notice, unlike the academic way, I did not create a horizon line. That's because in a weird way, the characters act as my horizon line, and all I needed was the little point of perspective, which is the vanishing point. So I hope that this kind of explained the natural method. And of course, once you start putting in some books in here and whatnot, you have to keep in mind that whatever books are closest to you will look bigger, and whatever books are furthest from you will look smaller. And yes, you can also line up the top of this book with the vanishing point. Hold it still, and your books can now be in perspective. I hope you got a lot out of these two videos. If you did not watch part one, please watch it today if you'd like to learn how I come up with background ideas. And if you enjoy this video, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up because it encourages me and lets me know that my videos are helping you. Be sure to subscribe, and until next time guys, please take care, God bless, and do not be afraid to nerd out. Take care guys!